Good morning and good evening, wherever you may be today. My name is Leah Zimmer. I'm the director of the International Student and Scholar Affairs Office, and we're delighted that you are joining us this morning. We wanted to provide some time to connect with your arrival information as you're getting ready to come to campus for the spring 2021 semester. We are absolutely thrilled to be able to welcome you. This morning, we're going to be talking about arriving in the US, talking about some of the documents that you have in hand, and considering how to get to campus, and we'll tell you a little bit about what's next. We, of course, have a full agenda, but we also want to give you time to ask questions. So there is a Q&A section for the webinar. There will not be an opportunity to ask over the call, but you can put any questions that you have in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to address those by the end of our presentation today. We are excited that this is the first event that we have that is just sort of formally giving you some information that may help your planning and your travels. Tomorrow we have our international student panel, and that is going to be much more focused on your experience as a student and how you could prepare for packing, what should you bring, what shouldn't you bring, what to expect in your first few days. And then later this week, you should have time to meet with your international ambassador so that they can just answer any specific questions you have and get you connected to other first-year students who are arriving this spring. We know it has been an incredibly challenging last 9 months, and many of your plans may not have been fulfilled, and we're just looking forward to your arrival and this shift for you. So today we're really going to focus on your documents, your arrival, and your those kind of first couple of days on campus. We do want to let you know that you are going to be joining a community of nearly 1,500 other international students who are studying at the university with an F1 or J1 visa. And that's really exciting to see that community continue to grow. Anytime you want to be connected with other students, we look forward to setting up opportunities for that connection and that community. I mentioned our international ambassadors, and we have a whole group of students who are also international, who have done the journey that you're about to embark on, and with many different experiences in the US prior to their arrival. You can see they're from many different countries. If you did not get an email from an international ambassador, then I would reach out to us at issa@nd.edu, and we'll make sure to figure out what happened. But they have been sending out emails, welcome emails, and then our scheduling meetings. These are also students that you'll meet your first day of international student orientation. And they're really great resources, and they're really excited to help you adjust and get to campus. In those first couple of days, we'll come back to this, but most of you should have a move-in or testing date of January 29th to the 31st. And it might be outside of there, but our hope is that you are here by January 31st so that you can complete the university testing protocols and then begin participating in orientation on that Monday morning on February 1st. We'll have a mix of virtual events and in person, and those virtual events are mostly required. The first session that you can see here at 9:30 is really a follow-up to today's conversation to tell you what you need to know to maintain your status now that you're on campus in the US and have your F1 visa status is active. We'll talk about that. It'll be a shorter conversation, but really essential information. We'll also have time for you to meet your IA student groups in person on that Monday. And there will be a short resource fair where you can access a few banks, a few phone companies, and talk to them to find out what to expect. We'll also have university health services at the resource fair and other resources from campus like the Notre Dame Police, the Multicultural Student Programs and Services Office, and just give you an opportunity to check in, ask questions before you really jump into Welcome Week with Student Affairs and with your residence hall. We're also working with Student Affairs to offer a shopping shuttle. And so you're going to get on campus, you are going to have some things with you. And while you're in your residence hall for the first couple of days, you'll start to recognize there's some, you need another shampoo, you forgot shampoo, you need another towel. Maybe you realize you are going to want more blankets since you're arriving in the middle of winter. And we'll have a shopping shuttle that will take you to some local stores like Walmart or Target to get those items and then bring you back to campus safely. One of the essential pieces that you will also be required to sign up for is for F1 and J1 registration. And this is different than university class registration. It's different than the roll call process. This is basically you confirming that you have arrived, what your address is, who your emergency contact is, and then we report that to the US government to activate your F1 or J1 status here in the US. And so that's essential. It must happen within the first couple of weeks of your arrival in the US. And so we have set aside some appointment times. You will get RSVP links for the resource fair and for that registration in the coming weeks. So after, this is all for when you get here. So the questions we want to address just broadly today to help prepare you include, what do I need to know about my F1, J1 documents? All of these documents that are establishing your status in the US. What should I expect at the port of entry? And what should I know about getting to campus in my first few days? And we know that some of you have already been in the US many times. You're very familiar maybe with the port of entry. Maybe you have visited and you have a good sense of that process, but you are coming in what is likely a different status. So if you have entered the US as a visitor, that evaluation at the port of entry is going to be a little bit different. So we want to talk through some of the things that you might expect. So even if you have a lot of experience crossing the port of entry, crossing the border, entering the US, and a lot of travel in the US, it may be a little bit different because you're now entering in this F1 status. So the first thing we'll talk about is just understanding your documents. And so I would say if you have your documents with you, that might be the best option for right now for the next few minutes, so that you can look at your documents and make that connection between what I'm saying and the documents that you're going to be carrying with you across the border. Because there is an assumption at the port of entry that you've spent time looking at them and reviewing them, and you understand what you're carrying and what kinds of questions may come up from the port of entry officer, the CBP officer. So the first document I want to talk about is the Form I-20 or the DS-2019. Most of you on the call have a Form I-20 because you will be studying at the university in F1 status. And one thing I will note very, very early, we may say it a couple of times in the coming weeks, is that this document has a very large stamp on the front that says F1. And so many students think this is their F1 document or their F1 visa. And when they contact us, it's occasionally a little bit confusing. But this document, the 3 pages that you have with your program information, your biographical information, your SEVIS ID, even though it says F1 in very large letters on this document, this is your Form I-20. And this is the form that you did take to the consulate to apply for the visa. And basically this is an eligibility form. It says you are eligible to apply for an F1 visa. The university has accepted your admission. This gives information about your program, dates, your program of study. So it's really important that you pay attention to the information that's on here and that you review it throughout your time at the university. It's also important that you carry this with you every time you enter the US and that you know it's accurate as you're crossing the border and entering at the port of entry. You'll note, and it's similar for both the DS-2019 and the I-20, your name, your country of citizenship, date of birth. What tends to change the most is the program of study information. So if you change your major while you're at the university, you're going to need an updated I-20. If you, many of you have received updated I-20s because your program start date changed. And every time that changed, we had to issue a new I-20. And it will be the same for you upon your graduation. If you end up graduating early, we'll need to update your I-20. If you graduate late, we would need to update your I-20. And there's different processes that we'll talk about and remind you about while you're here. You'll see that it has the earliest admission date. So all of you are within the admission period with this Form I-20. And so that's good news. You could enter the US anytime from now until the start of classes. And the one thing I would note is that if it looks like your travel may push your arrival past the start of classes, then you're going to want to communicate with our office because we may need to update the Form I-20 so that you are not stopped at the port of entry because the date has passed on the Form I-20. So Form I-20 is super important. When you get here, you're going to want to tuck it in a safe place with your passport, and you're going to want to keep track of that while you are here. Really essential. This is the document that is establishing your legal presence in the US. So this is saying that this is the purpose for why you're here in the US, and this is the duration of your stay. So those program dates are very important. Your program of study is very important. And this is a document you want to keep track of. We can always reissue it. So if you lose it, if it gets damaged, then you want to reach out to our office and get an updated copy as quickly as possible. Your visa is actually the stamp that's in your passport. And so when we look at the visa, all of the name information on your visa should match your passport biographical information. It should match the I-20. But the purpose of this visa is simply to allow you to present at a port of entry. And at that point, the border officer can determine whether they will actually let you enter the US. But this visa says you have been evaluated, you are eligible to be considered for entry. And so this combined with that I-20 gives the Border Patrol officer some information about why you are choosing to enter. And we'll talk in a minute about the other documents you're going to carry with you. But this visa is only valid at the border to permit that entry, right? To give permission for that entry. So you'll notice the expiration date. It's important to know that this can expire while you are present in the US. Your I-20 that we just looked at cannot expire while you're in the US. It's really important that those dates match your presence in the US, but your visa is valid at the border to allow you to enter through the port of entry. So the expiration date on that is going to be important. You'll notice that it has information. The Border Patrol officer will scan your visa most likely to confirm what status to enter you in. It'll have your citizenship in the bottom here. And but really what becomes most important is making sure that the information here matches your passport and your I-20, and that when you're entering before the expiration date of the visa. If your visa expires while you're in the US, like I said, it is no problem, but you can only apply for a new visa outside of the US. There's no mechanism for applying for a new visa in the US. And you want to ensure, especially those of you who have a B visa stamp in your passport, that every time you enter the US, from now until you graduate, and even after graduation when you're doing work authorization after graduation, you want to enter the US in F1 status every time. If you're an exchange student, you want to enter J status. There's no reason to use your B visa while you're entering the US, and you have the F1 visa stamp in your passport. And I'll tell you, we had a few students who entered the US with their B visa at the beginning of the pandemic, and then were stuck. Their intent had been just to come in for a couple days, then exit the US, and then come back in an F1 status. And as the world shut down in March, they were stuck in the US in a status that did not allow them to study. So that B visa is not going to help you or give you permission to study full-time at the University of Notre Dame. Only the F or the J visa will do that. So those are just a few notes about that visa stamp that's in your passport. For our Canadian students, you do not have a visa stamp. You only need that I-20 at the port of entry. So your status, so we'll assume all of you are F1 status. Your status is determined by this Form I-20, by the visa stamp, and by the admission stamp and I-94 record, which we'll come back to. The I-20 is a reflection of your SEVIS record, which is what our office manages. And that's where we're communicating to the government any changes to your status. If you end up graduating early or late, we report that to the government. If your major changes, we report that to the government. Every time your address changes in the US, we're reporting that to the government. It's a requirement of your status. And so we will continue to send out reminders. And in our conversation on February 1st, we'll talk a little bit more about those responsibilities. And it's really essential. If you lose or violate your status, there's some pretty serious consequences. You cannot work, you could be subject to removal, and you may have difficulty returning in the future. So we don't want you to worry about your status all the time. Your purpose for coming to the US is to be a student, is to engage in the life of the university, to pursue your studies, and that is your focus of your time at Notre Dame. And you also, as an international student, have this extra level to manage of information and to consider as you're making decisions, does this impact my F1 or J1 status? And those questions are most important around employment, and that's what we'll talk about on February 1st. Once you're here, what are the limitations? What are the restrictions? What are the benefits that you have access to? So a few final thoughts. The first one I mentioned, keep track of your documents. This I-20 is really important. We almost every winter break have a student, or summer break have a student say, I left my I-20 at home, what do I do? And we can always resolve that, but it is better if you just keep track of your documents and you recognize them as an essential component of your time here at the university. You want to keep track of them, store them in a safe place, always know where they are. And we would say anytime you plan to exit the US, you want to review, is my visa still valid? Is the information on my Form I-20 still accurate and up to date? And do I have the appropriate travel validation signatures that I need from the ISSA office? We'll talk about that more on Monday, February 1st, because you all have what you need to enter the US at this point. We will also send out reminders at the beginning of each semester. Review your I-20, especially as you're making more decisions about your program of study. Maybe you add a major, maybe you drop a major, maybe you change. You're going to want to make sure that you communicate with our office because you're going to need an updated I-20 for that change. If you're getting ready to travel each time you're leaving or coming back at the beginning of the semester, you want to make sure that you reviewed and you have the correct authorizations that you need to participate in OPT or CPT or to travel. And then really just remember, these need to be with you when you're traveling. It's really essential to keep those in hand while you travel. No one is going to inspect your I-20 when you exit the US, but if you don't have it when you exit, you're not going to have it when you need it to re-enter. So we're going to shift and talk a little bit about arriving at the US port of entry. This could be any airport, basically, international airport that you may be entering. The port of entry, in your case, is the first airport that you enter in the US. So if you arrive in Miami and then you take a flight from Miami to Chicago, Miami is your port of entry. If you fly directly from your home airport into Chicago, Chicago is your port of entry. Other students often come through LA, through San Francisco, through Houston. They make that flight and then they take a second flight to Chicago or to South Bend Airport. Whatever the first airport is of your US entries, your port of entry. And each of them have a different culture, right? They're generally operating by the same rules, but there may be a different culture. And so we just want to give you some advice about how to approach that based on the general rules that we're aware of. So there are really 3 steps to the port of entry. The document inspection is the first step, and this is where your experience may vary. Typically, there are special lines for F1 and J1 student visa holders to come through, and because they have to do a longer document inspection than they do when you are entering with a B visa or the visa waiver program. So you want to make sure that the documents listed here are with you in your carry-on luggage. Do not put them in your checked luggage. You do need them, and you will need them before you get your luggage back. So it's essential that you carry your passport with you. That visa stamp will be in the passport. The I-20 or DS 2019 should be with you. You want to make sure that you carry the SEVIS fee receipt with you. You probably took that to your consulate appointment, And that's really important, that I-901 fee receipt, you need to carry that with you. You also want to carry your Notre Dame admission letter. And if this came via email, print off the email, have a copy of that with you as you're crossing into the US. And then finally, you're going to want to have supporting financial documentation. If you have a scholarship letter from the university, you can use that. If your family presented bank statements from your parents, you want to carry a version of that with you. It is very likely that no one will ask about the financial documentation, but the Customs and Border Patrol do suggest that you carry it with you in case further inspection is needed. Most students get to the document inspection point, they present their I-20, they're wearing their Notre Dame t-shirt, the officer says, "Oh, go Irish," and they come in with no problem and no secondary experience. They grab their luggage, they go through customs, it's fine. And they have all these documents with them, they're ready to go. Everything is printed off, they've got copies of everything. And this is especially important because the I-20 was probably sent to you digitally. So you want to make sure you print that off, you sign it, you're ready to go at the port of entry with this document inspection. Some students, though, are pulled into secondary inspection, and this is because the officer who is doing the document inspection has the least amount of information about your situation. And so if there are any flags, any questions, maybe your name matches somebody else's who is of concern, maybe because the date changes had to change because of your inability to get in before, they may have some questions. That first officer in document inspection doesn't actually have a ton of information, but they may just see a flag on your file. And they're at that point going to have to send you to secondary inspection. And thousands of people are sent to secondary inspection every day, which means that sometimes your wait may be a little bit longer. They may not talk to you for an hour and you're just sitting trying to figure out what's next. If you're traveling with your family, it may be that one of you is stopped for secondary inspection and others are not. And when we have talked to the Customs and Border Patrol, because we visit our local Chicago office each year to get a sense of what they're working on and what's important to them right now, they have said, do not panic, don't worry, it's a part of the process, and they just need to spend a little bit more time with your profile and do a little bit more inspection, and generally students are then just sent right through and approved, and they just need a little bit more time. Chicago in particular has thousands and thousands of people fly through. Hundreds and hundreds are stopped in the secondary inspection. They just have a few more questions. And so it might take a while for them to get to you, but they will. And they'll have those questions for you. And at that time, you just want to remain calm. Just wait for the questions. You have your documents. You have what you need to successfully enter. It is ultimately the Customs and Border Patrol agent's decision to grant you entry. But that isn't really cause for concern. Most students are able to come through very quickly, explain their situation, have the Notre Dame admission letter. It's very clear why you're entering the US. Once you have gone through document inspection or secondary inspection, you are then going to pick up your luggage and then go through customs, where you're going to need to declare, like you do when you're here on a B visitor visa or a visa waiver program, declare if you have any significant items of note, significant amounts of money that you're carrying, and that will be all very clear there. If you've traveled internationally or traveled to the US before, you know on the plane they're going to ask you to fill out the I-94 and form, and they're going to ask you to declare anything that you may have for customs. So just make sure you have a pen with you for that part of the trip so you can fill that out, but that you'll have time to prepare for passing through these different sections at the airport while you're there. So that's going to be your experience when you come to the port of entry. You'll probably have a different line. You'll probably have a few more questions, and some of you may be pulled into secondary inspection for additional questioning. Remain calm. You have what you need to enter. You have a very clear purpose, and we are looking forward to you moving through that space. If you are traveling alone, we would recommend that you have a plan that when you land, the airplane lands, that you text a family member or a friend and just say, I've landed. And then once you've crossed through the inspection site, that you also text and just confirm you've made it through the inspection site. And that way, if you are delayed, people are able to track. Often, if you are caught in secondary inspection, you are not permitted to use your phone. And there may be limitations on your ability to communicate with people. So you just want to give people around you a sense of when you've landed and when you've made it through inspection. The other thing is that while you're waiting in line, you should not have your phone out generally. You're just standing there waiting. You're not going to be communicating. And so you want to do that right before you get off the plane, if possible. The second thing, or an additional thing, it's very important to know about these inspection points is that the Customs and Border Patrol do have the right to ask for your devices. So your phone, your laptop, your iPad, especially if you were pushed into secondary inspection, they may ask to see those and they may ask for your passwords. And they have the right to do that per US regulations. And so just be cognizant of that. If they ask, it is a legitimate ask and you do need to comply and provide that information in the secondary inspection if asked for it. So while you're at the inspection, the initial inspection, the document inspection, once they've looked at your papers, they are going to give you an admission stamp. You want to check the admission stamp before you leave that section. It will say that you've been admitted. It will give this little 3-letter code, and this one is for Chicago. And it will say that you've been entered in F1 or J1 status, and they should write DS below it. If they don't write the DS below that F1, you're going to want to contact our office so that we can investigate your I-94 record and confirm why they gave you a limited entry. Because duration of status means that you are permitted to enter the US and be present in the US for the duration of your I-20 or DS 2019 program dates, the duration of that status. Once you are here, we would want you, every time you enter the US, you're going to want to Google the I-94 record and check your I-94 record. You're confirming that the Border Patrol officer actually entered your I-94 number correctly, that the visa status is correct, and that you've been entered for DS, for that duration of status. Those of you who are entering or have previously entered in a B status or have a visa waiver program, this is where you want to do a little double checking. Because you have this other visa stamp present in your passport, you want to make sure that you present the F1 visa for their review, and you're just ensuring that they processed you in the correct status, because a B status is not going to allow you to study full-time and will definitely not allow you to work on campus in any capacity. So we talked a little bit about entering and when you can enter. So any of you on the call, if your program start date is February 3rd, you can already enter the US at this point. If you expect that you're going to be entering after February 3rd because of travel delays, maybe there just is not a flight available until later, then you're going to want to contact our office. It's really important to know that all Notre Dame students must be on campus and have completed roll call on campus by February 10th in order to participate on campus this spring. If you cannot physically get to campus by February 10th, then you would not be permitted to arrive on campus after that date. You could, if you're in online classes, continue to participate online, but that February 10th date is a deadline that you do need to be aware of. And we would want to update your I-20 or DS 2019 to reflect that late arrival. Some of you may be impacted by the new rule that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention announced last week, in which all travelers to the US, whether you're a US citizen or not, must present a negative test to the airline that was done at least 3 days before your departure date. So if you are arriving in the US after January 26th, you are going to want to have communicated with the airline. You want to make sure that you've reviewed the requirements and that you've set up that testing date. The January 26th deadline is set by the US government, and your airline should be very aware of what they're going to be requiring from you, because they will be regulating that process. So reach out to your airline, figure out what are your steps going to be. You are still responsible once you come on campus to follow all of the university testing protocols. So the CDC recommended that once you've arrived in the US that you isolate for 5 days and then take another test. You will be taking a test upon arrival. You should have those test results within a day. And so you can then participate in any of the in-person events for Welcome Week and for International Student Orientation. But we do want you to be aware of the just your surroundings, your engagement, wearing a mask at all times until you are able to be tested again. And all international students who have had to travel to the US will be included in surveillance testing within the first 14 days of your stay in the US. So lots of testing opportunities. And but for sure, for that initial test, contact your airline if they have not already reached out to you, and ensure you understand the testing requirements that they have in place. So a few notes about getting to campus. Once you've gotten through the port of entry, you've arrived at the airport, you're ready to go. Most of you will likely come through Chicago. Some of you may be able to get sort of final flights directly to the South Bend Airport. And but Chicago is the typical destination point because the transportation options from Chicago are just a little bit better. So many of our students will just grab an Uber from the Chicago Midway or O'Hare Airport. It typically costs around $200 to get from the airport to campus. And if you want to coordinate with another student, if you're arriving about the same time, you can certainly share that, but many students have taken advantage of that. There is a shuttle, a bus shuttle that runs from Midway and O'Hare to campus, and you do need to RSVP and hold your spot. We sent that information out in an email last week, and you can also find it on our website. So seats are very limited. The bus only runs twice a day. And so maybe your flight comes in at 7 o'clock on the January 30th, then you might want to sign up for the 1 o'clock bus on January 31st that will bring you to campus. Of course, that may affect your testing and move-in, and so you'll want to coordinate that. The longer way to get to campus is to take the Chicago train, Transit Authority train, from the airport to downtown. And then from downtown, there is a train that runs from Millennium Park in downtown Chicago to the South Bend Airport. And that's called the Shoreline, South Shore line train. You can take that. And then there's just a very quick 15-minute taxi ride from the South Bend Airport to campus. And it is definitely a longer journey. We'll be very honest. It will probably take you about 4.5 hours, maybe 5 to do that particular journey, depending on when you arrive, versus the Royal Excursion bus is going to be 2.5 to 3 hours versus an Uber that might just be a quick 2 hours. So the most expensive option is the Uber. The second most expensive is the Royal Excursion. And then the CTA is probably going to run you about $50 to get, and it will just take you a longer time. One advantage is you get to see downtown Chicago, which will be beautiful, and before you come back to return to campus. Once you get on campus, it's really essential that you read all of the testing emails carefully to understand the process, to understand where to go when you get on campus. Depending on when you arrive, there may be a welcome table for groups from Student Affairs and from Notre Dame International to welcome with you. If you have any delays, and this is very typical, so do not worry about it at all. If you have any delays with your flight, with your transportation, it's important that you communicate with your rector or the hall staff that you've been in contact with, just to let them know when you expect to arrive. If you end up not getting into campus until 1 or 2 in the morning, it's fine. You are not the first student to arrive late, but we want to communicate with your rector and with your hall staff about your travel plans. So what's next? We've come to the end of this particular portion of the conversation, and we'll check the Q&A to see if anyone's put questions in. But a few things for you to do next. It's a long list, but it's very low key, truly. The first is if you have not reviewed page 2 of your Form I-20, page 3 of your Form I-20 or page 2 of your DS 2019, then you need to do that. The border agents are expecting that you know the documents that you're coming in with. It is not a super exciting read, but it does give you a lot of information about the I-20, the benefits, the limitations, your responsibilities. We will talk more about those on February 1st. But if you have not read those information pages attached to your eligibility documents, you should do so. Put aside 15 minutes to just go through and understand what it is that you signed and understand what it is that you will be expected to do as an F1 or J1 student. I know that you are getting many emails from the Center for University Advising, from Student Affairs, from your residence hall, from University Health Services, so many emails. And I would just highly recommend again that you read them all and take that time, because if you read them now, you're just going to come to campus much better prepared. One of the things that students will talk a little bit about tomorrow in the panel is about their expectations for when they were first coming to campus and how those were met or not met. And we'll have conversations through the spring about cultural adjustment, culture shock, and one of the driving factors of culture shock is just your expectations for the experience and how reality meets those expectations. And our hope is that the panel tomorrow will give you a sense of what to expect from your first couple of months on campus, especially coming in a different time where campus is a little bit different because of the global health crisis and the different activities that have been put in place to support you in the midst of that and the restrictions that we have for gathering. It's really important just to think about what are your expectations upon arrival, and then join us tomorrow for one of the two panels to hear from students who've already done the journey you're about to do and how what their expectations were for their time here and what has their experience look like and what did they pack, what did they not pack, where did they first go when they got on campus, what are the favorite spots. They'll be talking about all of that tomorrow. Your international ambassador emailed you last week, so make sure that you respond to that email, introduce yourself. Some of you have met many of the Senior Hall Fellows or other students through the Engage ND program, and these international ambassadors are another resource for you as you're moving to campus. You want to make sure that you RSVP for the student panel tomorrow and the events on February 1st. More RSVP links will go out for the resource fair, and they will go out for the shuttle at some point and some of the other activities that we're going to be having. And I mentioned that once you come to campus, you're going to be completing F1 or J1 student registration, and that will be the week of February 2nd, 3rd, 4th. We'll also send RSVP links for you to sign up for a 10-minute appointment with an advisor to complete that process and to go from there. So lots of good things for you to be considering and participating in. And just remember, your main purpose is to come as a University of Notre Dame student, to participate in your studies, participate in the research and student groups in the life of the university, and be a full member of that. And there's just going to be some points in your experience where you're going to need to consider your visa status and the impacts your decisions have on that status, or the ways in which that status may add some extra questions. So when we think about those questions at the beginning, what are the documents that you need to be traveling with? We've talked about that. What do you need to know about your travel and arrival at the port of entry? We've talked about that. And what do you need to know about your first few days on campus and this transition to campus? And we've talked about that. So I'm going to check very quickly to see if there are any questions. So somebody asked about which admission letter should we carry, the fall 2020 or the spring 2021? And I would actually recommend carrying both. Just have them both with you. If there's any additional questions, the port of entry officers will not be surprised by your delay. Thousands and thousands of students were delayed because of the pandemic, but it would be good just to carry both of them with you, especially because the officer may see the date changes. You want to be able to say, oh, you know what, the university changed the start date for the spring so that we could all get here in time, so that we would have less risk of traveling to campus. That explains the spring date changes. but they're going to see there's been a number of different dates with your SEVIS record. And so just carry both of those admits, but you can present the spring 2021 admit letter if you have it first, but no problem there. Any other questions? You do not need your birth certificate. If you wanted to, definitely just carry a copy, but they are not going to likely ask for that. They may have needed it at the consulate, but the Border Patrol officer will be less concerned with that. Yeah, so someone asked about the appointments for the I-20 registration, and we are going to send out a link, a series of links later this week that you can sign up for the resource fair, you can sign up for an appointment time, and that you can sign up for the shuttle that will be happening on that Monday. So look for that email. General emails that you get from ISSA are going to be very specifically connected to your status and next steps, where they're going to be connected to sort of cultural adjustment, engaging, sharing your culture, thinking about home. So those are going to be the two primary roles that our newsletter plays or any emails from us play. And someone asked, do we carry all of the I-20 forms that we have or just the latest one? And you can carry just the latest one, the most recent one that has that February 3rd program start date. Any other questions? One more. When should we be reporting our changes to our major if it occurred multiple times throughout our first and second years? Every time your major changes, you need to connect with our office to get a new I-20. That is one of those changes, and we will, talk about this more on February 1st. But every time your I-20 changes, the program dates changed, your biographical information changes, or your program of study changes, you need to connect with us to get an updated I-20. So I'll give just 1 or 2 more minutes to put a question in, and we'll remind you multiple times, our office is really here to help. And if we don't know the answer, it can sometimes take a few days to connect with who does have the answer, but we are often working nonstop behind the scenes to find answers to students' questions, to give you the support that you need for your immigration status. And it is really your responsibility to manage that status. We cannot cross the border or arrive at the port of entry with you and explain to the border officer everything that you have. We cannot submit documents to other U.S. government agencies for you. It is your status to manage, but we are really here to help you do that effectively. And we will send reminders. We'll reach out to you if there's questions or concerns. We do not work for a government agency. We're here to support you, to work for you on behalf of the university. And help you manage that status relationship. As you're talking with the Center for University Advising or Student Affairs or your rector, it's really important to know that any questions connected to your immigration status should come to our office. And we are the only ones that should be signing your documents, your I-20, your form, DS 2019. And we're the only office that should be giving you advice on next steps related to that status. There are so many incredibly helpful, kind people on campus, and we each have a very specific body of knowledge. So anything related to your F1 or J1 status, we would say direct to our office so that we can assist you most effectively. We hope this has been really helpful. And as you consider your arrival, we will send out a reminder with some of the information that we've shared today. And also just a reminder about tomorrow's Student International Ambassador panel. Looking forward to meeting all of you in person and hope that you have a wonderful day wherever you are.